So what is a settlement statement? A settlement statement is your actual final statement in which outlines all the charges that are in conjunction with the final transaction. On the settlement statement, I'm going to focus on the HUD versus the CD. Those are two different documents, and the CD is typically whenever you have a conventional lender involved. On the HUD, it's very easy to read once you have a good understanding of what it is that you should be looking for. It's going to outline your closing date, who the parties to the transaction are, your buyer and seller, and the legal description and the address of the property. In addition to, it's going to start with your sales price. You want to make sure that you know how to read where your sales price is on the contract, and this also is where you can understand where the contract comes into play. The title company uses the contract in order to prepare the closing statement, meaning the contract is going to tell the title company exactly who is responsible for paying what fees. So this is where you're going to find where they're collecting the taxes, the owner's title policy, commissions, any type of seller's closing costs and or buyer's closing costs. So on a HUD settlement statement, the left-hand column is your buyer side and the right-hand column is your seller side. This works on the front page and on the second page. And the first thing that you want to be looking for is make sure your closing date is correct, your sales price is correct. You want to make sure that any applicable earnest money that you've deposited is being reflected on the closing statement as a credit. You also want to make sure that taxes are being prorated appropriately between the parties. And it also shows you how much the proceeds are for the seller and or how much money the buyer has to bring to the table. On the second page is where you're going to find at the very top any commissions that are due, if there are any. Down further in the middle is where you're going to find the title company fees. Now this is important because your sales contract is going to decipher whether or not the buyer's responsible for this as part of your negotiations or if these fees belong on the seller side. So everything that you have on that contract translates into the settlement statement. It'll also show you at the very bottom of that document the total and sum of all the closing fees that is then transferred over to the front. So this document is very important once you have a good understanding, because once you get this document before everybody signs, you want to make sure you review it, make sure all the fees are applicable, nothing's left off, your assignment fee and or wholesale fee is on there, and everything is being paid to the appropriate third parties. When you're reviewing the settlement statement, if you see that there's an issue or a fee that was omitted or needs to be added or moved to a different party's side, make sure that you either put that in writing or you contact the closer. Most importantly, they may ask you to follow up with something in writing, so you may have to convey that through email. But if it's something that you're asking to be changed that's stipulated within the sales contract, you need to make sure that everybody agrees to it and that the change is actually made on the contract. For instance, if the contract says that the seller is going to pay for the owner's title policy, and then you decided later that the buyer is going to pay for the owner's title policy, that cannot be corrected with a simple phone call or email. You'd have to go back, make that change on the contract, make sure everybody agrees to it in writing, and then send that over to title. So there's some fees that could just be accidentally omitted and added back on, but if it's something that's already outlined in the contract, those changes will have to be made to the contract and then transfer over into the settlement statement. So a closing disclosure is also known as a CD. This document is the settlement statement that's used whenever there's a third-party lender that is regulated by RESPA. For instance, conventional lenders, VAs, VA loans, and or FHA. Anything that is considered outside of RESPA guidelines goes on a HUD settlement statement. HUD is, it actually stands for the Housing and Urban Development. This document is the two-page document that looks more like an Excel spreadsheet, and this one is used for hard money transactions, cash transactions, and anything commercial. If it's not regulated by RESPA, you're going to be receiving a HUD.